Um, Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos is a leading British historian, analyst, and author specialising in Russia and the former Soviet Union. Before we get into those things, Marcus, can you just tell me, you're an intelligent bloke. You seem to be very, very level-headed. What the hell is wrong with the UK at the moment?
Well, Mike, the British people are angry, very, very angry. And if you think what they are saying on social media platforms reflects their anger, you should hear what British people across the UK are saying in their homes, in pubs, at bus stops, at train stations, and so on. The British people have now woken up. They have woken up to the reality that the British state, of which the monarchy is the heart of, has gone to war with the British people. The British state is attempting to eradicate the British national identity, the cultural and spiritual values of the British people. And what is even worse is that the British people are conscious now that the British state is attempting to replace them. So the UK is a powder keg, and that is a result of the malignant, diabolical agenda that the British state is imposing. And we have to be aware that the British state seeks to replicate what they have done in London across the whole of the United Kingdom. And the British people will not tolerate that. The British people are taking to towns and cities across the country to protest, and they are doing so legally and peacefully. The damage which has been inflicted over many decades now is enormous. And I have said for a number of years now that Britain, the Britain I was born in, is dead. But the British people are not dead. The British people can prevail. And if they do prevail, then we will create a new Britain. We will take the good aspects of the Britain which was killed by the British state, and we will learn lessons from what went wrong before. But in order to create that new Britain, the British state must be halted. It is as simple as that. Otherwise, all that we see happening in the country, such as in Epping, will be an exercise in futility.
Yeah, I totally agree. You need a political party that's going to help lead you through this, or are you are you that close to a civil war or a probably even a revolution within the boundaries of the UK? Are you that close, or do you have a political party that can? I mean, I look at Nigel, and I think Nigel Farage is not strong enough, and I look at the time between now and the next election. That's way too long. What do you think if you want to change what is happening? Either you have a civil war or a revolution, or you have an election. How do you achieve either one of those? And by the way, if you have an election, it doesn't mean you're going to have the answer, because you've got to find an opposition that, not only will it be a good opposition, it will also be a better government.
The British electoral system has been designed by the British ruling elite, and it is operated and controlled by the British ruling elite to ensure that the British ruling elite remain entrenched in power. Thus, I would not be surprised if the British ruling elite call a snap general election with the knowledge that reform will surge to power. But I have grave reservations about reform So, for example, Reform have said publicly that it will not deport all illegal immigrants. And let me be clear that the people who have crossed the English Channel in dinghies are not asylum seekers. They have broken the law of the United Kingdom. They are illegal immigrants, regardless of what that judge said last week in his ruling about the hotel in Epping. They are not asylum seekers. They are illegal immigrants who have broken the law of the United Kingdom. So Reform have said they will not deport all of them. Reform have also said that they will not halt immigration. Therefore, I am of the opinion that if Reform do form the next government, and I use government in a very loose way, then Reform will simply continue the agenda. The British people need to keep on protesting legally and peacefully. They need to keep on resurrecting their culture. They need to keep on restoring Christianity, because Christianity is at the heart of the British national identity. Indeed, it is at the heart of Western civilization. And what we see happening in Britain is happening in Australia. Why? Because Australia, Britain, Canada, and New Zealand are part of the same kingdom. Britons and Australians are one people. We have a shared heritage. We have a shared culture. We have a shared race. So if the system collapses in Britain, then inevitably it will collapse in Australia. But I want to make another point crystal clear, Mike, that what we see happening in Britain and in Australia is not the work of leftist politicians and leftist lawyers and woke activists who record themselves descending into tantrums on, for example, TikTok. No, those people are hardly the sharpest tools in the shed. No, someone has opened the doors for those people. Someone is using them to attack the British people, to attack the Australian people. After all, Charles III openly says that multiculturalism is a good thing in Britain and in Australia. Are we really going to believe that woke activists who record themselves yelling on TikTok have penetrated the monarchy? We have MI6 or SIS saying exactly the same thing as Charles. We have the heart of the global banking sector, which of course is in the City of London, saying the same things as SIS and as Charles. Again, are we really going to believe that woke activists and leftist politicians and leftist lawyers have penetrated MI6 and have penetrated the banking sector in the City of London? Of course not. This is being orchestrated against the British people and the Australian people by the heart of power in the Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Celtic world. And that is the monarchy, first and foremost, followed by the aristocracy, then the banking elite, then the financial elite, and there are other groups as well.
Yeah, it's very scary. And I mean, I look around and I think, is a revolution, because if you look at history, revolutions have achieved something. It's depending on who gets in after the revolution. You might go from the frying pan into the fire. But if you just have protests, then that's all it is, and government just keeps going on. So I don't know how you can get out of it except for a revolution or a civil war. And again, they can go pear-shaped very quickly. You study history, you see and especially British history. Has the UK been in a position like this before?
People often say that there was a revolution in English history, namely when Charles II was overthrown. However, that was not truly a revolution. If anything, it was a middle class revolution. Why? Because, firstly, the monarchy was not completely uprooted. And secondly, the aristocracy was not uprooted. Thus, England, the United Kingdom as a whole, has never experienced a revolution. And I believe what we are seeing at the moment bears all the hallmarks of a country that could be on the brink of radical change. And I believe radical change legally and peacefully. People must be aware that there are examples in history of revolutions which came about peacefully, where the regimes simply collapsed. And I believe that the regime in Britain is demonstrating distinct similarities to how, for example, the Habsburg Empire and the Romanov Empire was behaving leading up to World War One, because the Habsburgs and the Romanovs were completely detached from reality. They were completely ignoring the feelings, the needs of their respective populations. And at the same time, they kept on imposing an agenda on their populations that the populations not just bitterly disliked, but bitterly did not want. And what happened? The Habsburg Empire collapsed, the Romanov Empire collapsed, and we see the same happening with the British regime. That said, Mike, the English ruling elite, the British ruling elite, have been in power since 1066. That is nearly 1,000 years. They are not to be underestimated. They know how to be, they know how to survive. They know how to adapt. For example, they introduced a few hundred years ago the fake idea of a constitutional monarchy, where power lies with Parliament and a prime minister, and the monarch doesn't have any power. Well, that is an illusion. The monarchy has created layers between itself and Parliament and the prime minister as a way of saying to the population, you have democracy. We do not control you. The reality is that the monarchy is at the heart of British power, and that the people sitting in the House of Commons are useful idiots. They are puppets. And thank God, Mike, that the majority of the British people have now come to that realization that Britain is not a democracy. Britain is a tyranny and a kleptocracy. And Britain is the cleverest of all tyrannies in the world. And I would add this, the cleverest tyranny in human history.
Okay, so then, I mean, we've gone way over time from we wanted to talk about Russia, but I want to talk to you about this. Okay, if they're not going to give up their power base, what do you think would be their next act? I mean, if they want to stay in power or be close enough to be in power, what would they then? And studying history, looking at history through the centuries, what do you think they would do? I mean, do they create that civil war or that the violent episodes which we are starting to see slowly around the world? Do they create that? And then all of a sudden, government steps in and, for your own safety, we're going to snaffle everybody and lock you down, and this is just for your own safety? Or what do you think they would do?
No one, of course, wants war. No one, of course, wants violence. But I agree with what you have just said, Mike. I believe that it is more than conceivable that the British ruling elite seek anarchy, seek lawlessness as a way of stepping in, as a way of saying to the British people, we want to defend you, but in order to defend you, we need to allocate more powers to ourselves. So, in essence, what I am saying is that the British ruling elite will create anarchy as a pretext for introducing a full fledged tyranny. Britain, as I said, is already a tyranny, but it could become an even harder, an even harsher tyranny. And the British ruling elite are looking for a pretext. But the British people just have to keep on doing what they are doing, protesting on a regular basis across the country, legally and peacefully. They need to keep on returning to their history, their heritage, their culture, and their religion, Christianity. And one day you will see how the regime will start to fall apart. I would also say that it is possible that the British ruling elite will create another fake virus. They will introduce another pandemic. And whilst the devastation caused by the pandemic in, for example, Britain and also, of course, in Australia was horrendous in terms of the catastrophic economic damage and the catastrophic damage inflicted on people's lives. At the same time, Mike, the pandemic proved to be a catalyst. It opened people's eyes to the reality of those who rule them in Britain and in Australia. And it opened their eyes to the nature of the people who rule them in Britain and in Australia. And I monitored recently the wonderful protests all across Australia, the March for Australia protest. Absolutely phenomenal. Just a few years ago, would that have happened in Australia? Would that have happened at the beginning of 2025 in Australia? I have my doubts, but it shows how things are quickly moving in Australia and in Britain, and they are moving in our favour. Our meaning the people.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. Look, we could, and we'll do this again. I want to talk to you more about that in a longer form in the next week or so. But I just want to talk to you about Ukraine and peace talks, if you don't mind. Today I saw a photo and saw some footage of Putin, Xi Jinping, and Modi, and they look very, very comfortable indeed. There was jocularity. There was the direct looking at each other in the eyes. They seem to have a very good relationship. With that, and then we go to the Ukraine peace. You know, we always talk about the peace talks and blah 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 blah. Is it a consideration then that, you know, perhaps the peace talks are becoming irrelevant? Because if you have Modi and you have India, China, and Russia on such a good footing, doing great diplomacy, which the rest of the world is not doing, would this make the peace talks not irrelevant but close to it?
Well, first of all, Russia is not alienated. Russia is not a pariah. Russia has never been either of those things. There are nearly 200 countries in the world. Of that, between 30 and 40 countries have imposed sanctions on Russia. And 99% of those countries are in the Western world. And of course, the Western world is not free. The Western world is controlled by or ruled by globalists, or as I describe, the Western ruling elites, which means the vast majority of countries in the world continue to trade with Russia, continue to talk with Russia, continue to have bilateral relations with Russia. In regard to Ukraine, the meeting in the White House not so long ago between, on the one hand, Trump and on the other hand, Zelensky, Starmer, Macron, Merz, Stubbs, Maloney, and Rutte produced nothing of significance and certainly produced nothing new. All it demonstrated is that the British and the European ruling elites want the war in Ukraine to continue, while Trump is happy to make money from the warmongering endeavours of the British and the Europeans. The British and the European ruling elites can drone on about security guarantees to Ukraine. They can drone on about the so-called coalition of the willing. That means nothing in reality. It means nothing in practice. Why? Because the Kremlin has said time and time again that it will never countenance NATO troops in Ukraine. Russia would go to war, including, yes, a nuclear war to prevent NATO troops entering Ukraine. The Americans know that. That is why they are distancing themselves from the warmongering words of the British and the Europeans. So, as I have said for the last three years, the war in Ukraine will be determined on the battlefield. Now that the Russian military is in Ukraine, nothing will eject the Russians from Ukraine, and the Russian military will capture the vast majority of Ukraine. Because in a scenario where NATO troops as peacekeepers would enter Ukraine, that would mean effectively, de facto, Ukraine would be a member of NATO. The ports of Odessa and Ochakov would be NATO ports. The oblasts of Kiev, Sumy, and Kharkov would host NATO strategic missiles. Ukraine would be bristling with tens of thousands of NATO soldiers and tens of thousands of pieces of NATO hardware. It will never happen. And that is the brutal reality. And we also hear Western mainstream media putting out a new term to describe Russia, China, and Iran and other countries. Quote, the axis of upheaval. Again, this is typical language of the British ruling elite, grand sounding with no meaning in practice. And of course, the inversion is not lost on me or lost on anyone, even with just a few brain cells. Because if we want to talk about an axis of upheaval, then we should look at the Western ruling elites. We should look at the globalists, the malignant dark forces who rule the Western world.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I just need to look at the UK, which we were talking about. There's, I probably wouldn't use upheaval. I would probably use chaos or incompetence or whatever. Just imagine, though, if there were a peace talks, and if they did succeed, how do you think this would? What would be the outlook for Ukraine and Zelensky?
The peace talks simply will not achieve anything. It is futile to even talk about it hypothetically, because the Kremlin knows this, that in 4 years' time, there will be a new president in the United States. That president could be controlled by the American deep state. Thus, if there were peacekeepers in Ukraine, the new administration in Washington could resurrect the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. And then NATO would have the advantage over Russia because, of course, peacekeeping troops, NATO peacekeeping troops, would be in Ukraine. The Russians will never tolerate that. That is why I have said for some time now that I believe the White House and the Kremlin have come to a secret agreement over Ukraine. I believe it involves the Trump administration giving the Kremlin a free hand in Ukraine, and in response, the Kremlin is given a free hand to the Americans in various parts of the world. People need to understand that this is the only opportunity the Kremlin has now to ensure that never, ever will the lands which comprise Ukraine be admitted into NATO. The only worthy news in relation to Ukraine is this, Mike. Recently, the Ukrainians attacked, sabotaged the Druzhba oil pipeline in Russia. Why is that significant? Because that pipeline provides oil to Slovakia and Hungary. Indeed, that is the only source of oil to Hungary and Slovakia. And Hungary and Slovakia do not play a part in the war in Ukraine. In fact, they are very much opposed to the war in Ukraine. So the Ukrainians are targeting the energy, survival of Hungary and Slovakia. And Hungary and Slovakia are members of the EU and NATO. And yet there hasn't been one word from NATO or the European Union regarding the attack on that oil pipeline and what it means for the industries and the domestic households of Hungary and Slovakia. That tells you how utterly rotten and deceitful the European Union and NATO is.
So really, NATO then is, it is now ineffective, and while this continues, it will become even more ineffective. What would the landscape be then if there were no NATO?
In a Europe where NATO is no longer in existence, it means that countries would have liberated themselves. It means they would be free of globalism. It means that they can restore their heritage, their national identities, their cultures, and their spiritual values. Those countries would then start talking with each other. They would then start signing agreements with each other about ensuring that never again will their independence and their sovereignty be violated, come under the control of alien entities such as the European Union and NATO. And that Europe would be a peaceful Europe. It would be a stable Europe, because at the moment, all that we see happening in Europe is a result of the European Union and NATO as a whole, the Western ruling elites. NATO is not a defensive or peaceful military bloc. It is a criminal and aggressive military bloc. After all, it bombed the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in 1999 in support of Albanian terrorists and Albanian organized crime. And of course, I am referring to the so-called Kosovo Liberation Army. When NATO bombed the Serbs in 1999, NATO didn't just violate international law and the United Nations Charter. NATO violated its own founding treaty. Article 1 of the North Atlantic Treaty stipulates clearly and unambiguously that NATO will never use military force to settle a dispute. That tells you everything. What we see happening today in regard to NATO and so-called humanitarian intervention didn't begin in Iraq or Libya. No, it began in the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s, when the Western ruling elites used NATO to go to war against the Serbs. And I'm encouraged, Mike, that many people in the Western world, for example, in Britain and in America, are now realizing that they were deceived about the Serbs, that the Serbs fought against everything and warned against everything which is devouring the Western world today. So again, that is another major development which we should rejoice over.
Look, are you able to hang around for a while? I just want to go to a quick commercial break and come back to you.
Yes,
I want to talk about the EU and some of the problems they are creating and some of the problems that are facing them. So do you mind hanging around for a while, Marcus?
I would be delighted. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. My guest here is Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos. This is The World Today.
Emma, did you hear?
Todd's in the hospital.
Who's Todd? He got a collapsed lung from vaping. He thought it was cool.
Not cool.
Promise you won't vape, Emma. It can lead to a lifelong addiction, and we can't be friends if your lungs collapse.
Bogus.
Wacky sitcom teens aren't the best people to talk to your kid about vaping.
Hey, you got a minute?
You are. Start the conversation with your child about vaping today.
A lot of my friends told me that I wasn't going to be able to do it. You don't need to start out with a teenager because they've had all these things that they've gone through.
Could we give him the things he needed to be a successful adult?
What parent isn't worried about, what am I not doing right? What am I not doing enough?
That's my son. My dad showcased a sense of love that I never had before.
I had a rough time, but I saw that even though the way I was acting, they didn't push me away.
She says that we're her heroes, but she's also mine.
I've had 3 other mother figures in my life, but only one of them has taught me how a mother loves.
How you guys raised me is absolutely amazing. And I really, really appreciate that.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org.
If you don't have a smoke alarm in your bedroom, by the time a fire burns through your door to activate your smoke alarm, it will be too late. Install smoke alarms in your bedrooms today.
If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Our live shows are also on X, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Kick, and Twitch. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.
And we're back again. If a guest has actually turned up, but I still have a question for Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos before we cross over to talk about farming. Marcus, looking at the EU, they seem to be a bunch of countries, in layman's words, a collective of countries that are in this whirlpool that is just spiraling out of control to the deep blue never. How can they get out of it? How can they get some sort of stability? Because at the moment, the EU is truly a basket case, if ever you've seen a basket case.
The European Union is not Europe, and Europe is most certainly not the European Union. The EU is one of the weapons which the globalists use to not only devastate the national identities and cultures of the ancient nations of Europe, but also to steal from the ancient nations of Europe, by which I mean to make money from. Thus, they take over the national industries of European countries. They take over the natural resources of European countries, and they use them for themselves. So the European Union, like NATO, is in very serious trouble. Why? Because there is a cultural awakening across the whole of Europe, and that is the greatest threat to the existence of the European Union. That is why, for decades, the European Union has flooded Europe with immigrants. That is why the European Union has inflicted terrible damage on the national identities of the ancient nations of Europe. The globalists fear patriotism. They fear nationalism, because patriotism and nationalism means that a race comes together, whatever their political differences are, whatever their social backgrounds are, they are binded together by their race, by their ethnicity, by their culture. And when a people come together, then a regime, wherever it may be in the world, is doomed. That is why they are demonizing patriotism. That is why they are demonizing nationalism. That is why they are arresting people for displaying their flags. That is why they are arresting priests for quoting in public verses of the Bible. That is why, starting from the 1960s in Britain and in Australia, for example, the British ruling elite, which controls, of course, both countries, began targeting the culture of the British and the Australians. And of course, it's one culture. Britons and Australians, as I said, form one people. Because the British ruling elite would not have been able to achieve what it has achieved so far if they did not remove culture, and in particular Christianity. And the European Union elites are doing that in Europe. So again, there are protests all over Europe. The ancient nations of Europe are coming together, and they are also joining hands with each other. There is no more anti-German sentiment in Britain or in France. And that, again, is another major development. We need to put the history behind us because we, as Europeans, as the ancient nations of Europe, have a common enemy in the form of globalists who seek to destroy us, who seek to replace us. So the European Union, they can keep on saying in public that, for example, Russia is orchestrating the immigration, the illegal immigrants entering Europe. No one listens, or very few people listen to them. People as a whole know that they are pathological liars. People need to keep on doing what they are doing, keep on defying in Europe, keep on rallying, keep on protesting, keep on flying their flags, keep on going to church, express pride in their history, express pride in their culture. Stop watching celebrity culture and celebrity and reality television and all other soulless, decadent, degenerate pursuits, which is one of the ways in which the Western ruling elites distracted people away from their culture. They distracted them away through celebrity culture and reality television. But as I said, that is largely on the demise now. So people just need to keep on doing what they're doing in Britain, in Australia, and in Europe. Keep on attending church, keep on flying that flag, keep on protesting legally and peacefully, and we, the people, will win.
I couldn't agree with you more. But we will have you on again shortly, God. So I want to talk to you about a whole bunch of more things to do with the UK, in fact. And I think you and I can get into and chew some fat over it, as they would say. Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, if somebody wants to find out more about you, how do they do that, sir?
I am on numerous social media platforms. So I am on Facebook, I am on X, I am on Odyssey, I am on Rumble, and of course I have a YouTube channel. Also, I have 2 books on Russian history, Russian modern day politics as well, which can be purchased.
Where from? Amazon?
Yes, they can be purchased on Amazon. Alternatively, they can be directly purchased from myself.
Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, I appreciate your time and your effort and your patience. Thank you very much, sir.